Living history, World War II stories as told by those who were there.
Olin Carter, Olin Carter, better known as OB. And I was born January 27th, 1921. I'm 82 years old. So I was born on a farm. I think I was about 6 years old. And there was an old Capital Airlines airplane, I think it was a seaplane. It used to fly right over our farm in what I now realize was a direct line between Detroit and Milwaukee. Every day at about 3 o'clock. And I'd be playing out in the yard and I'd yell up at him to please come down and give me a ride. And I think that's where my initial interest in aviation started. We left the farm, I think, when I was about 7. And it was at a county fair in Ionia, Michigan. And I got a ride in an old Waco taper wing. One of those deals where you pay $1 and went around the pattern. And I was hooked, absolutely. Created the Civilian Pilot Training Program, CPTP they called it, and I was very fortunate to be in the very first year of that program, in which we got a private license. So actually I had a commercial license before I ever went in the Army Air Corps. Actually I soloed in a J4 Cub, which was side-by-side, but I also flew the J3 there. And then the following year we flew the Waco UPF-7, which is an open cockpit biplane. A lot of fun. I was just over the hill here in Hemet, California in primary flying school. I had just finished all of the flying and the academics for primary, and we were waiting orders to go to basic on December 7th. We didn't know what Pearl Harbor was. Nobody had ever heard of it. I thought, well, we'll make a long diving pass down this canyon towards the ocean and then turn south and go back to San Diego. And went screaming down this canyon. I guess we were clocking along about 350, something like that. And all of a sudden something happened and I didn't know what it was. I thought I'd lost an engine and I pulled up in a hurry and checked the instrument panel. Everything was fine. Then I noticed some fluid streaming past the left wing, or left window. It was hydraulic fluid. And then I looked up front and there was a coil of wire around one of the machine guns. And I looked out the left wing and it had a crease about 6 inches deep. The whole leading edge of the wing and 3 feet of the wingtip was gone. So we got it back and landed. And I had taken out 2 of those high voltage cables of a 3-cable cross-country line. There were no towers. The towers for this cable that I took out the bottom 2 cables were on the mountaintop on either side. And it was a 900-foot span at the bottom of that span. So that caused a little problem. I finally got out of that.
We want highly motivated volunteers for a mission, and we can't tell you what we're going to do. Everybody wanted to go with us. No personnel limitations. You get whoever you wanted.
We were picked in Goldsboro and told we were going to join Project Number 9. And we had no idea what that was, and no one told us what it was.
One of the men they wanted was 21-year-old Sergeant Gene Peaster from Norco, California. He'd just finished training on P-38 fighters.
We felt like we could take that plane apart and put it back together again. We knew it inside and out.
Peaster would become crew chief for a 22-year-old pilot from Michigan, Olin O.B. Carter.
And the strange thing was I had just been married about a week or so before that, so to volunteer to leave your bride is a little unusual, I guess. She knew my first love was flying.
Obie kissed his wife Norma goodbye and headed for India as part of the 1st Air Commandos. It took Allison and Cochran less than a month to assemble a combat unit with 348 aircraft and 523 men.
I met them only first time I got off the airplane in Karachi. I'll never forget it as long as I live. They were there to meet the airplane, and we came off and reached out and shook hands with Allison and then Cochran. I had a musette bag over my shoulder, and in the top of that bag was 2 bottles of scotch. And one of them fell out on the pavement right there, and I was mortified. And Cochran looked down at it and he said, well, aren't you going to get down and lick it up? He said, you know what that costs over here?
So we got 30 P-51s.
We knew the Allison engine, which was in that P-38, was the same engine in our P-51A.
We got, I think, 15 B-25s, and we got 25 or 30 C-47s. We had 100 ambulance planes. We had 100 cargo gliders, and we carried the first helicopters ever in the combat.
First time you ever saw a helicopter?
Didn't believe it.
By December of '43, the 1st Air Commandos had set up 2 air bases deep in the jungles of India. The fighters and light ambulance planes were at Hailakandi, 10 miles away. The gliders and C-47 tow planes were positioned at Lalagat. Gene Peaster was crew chief for O.B. Carter, and their P-51 nicknamed Little Kitten.
It was your wife's nickname, so we put Little Kitten on the airplane.
Wingate knew his Chindit forces were now protected by American air power.
The Japanese interior forces were inferior. And so what he wanted to do is he wanted to leapfrog over the front lines and get about 200 miles to the rear. Then he could start chewing away at the logistics lines.
Little Kitten and the other aircraft started softening up the enemy defenses.
They were flying missions in preparation for this invasion. They would do damage to the Japanese supply lines, the rail yards and the railroad bridges. They'd take out those with their bombs and machine guns.
Cochrane taught us, if you can deliver that bomb low enough and pull out right on the treetops, you avoid getting your own shrapnel. But you increase your accuracy to almost 100%. We thought they were crazy. To illustrate, almost every glider landing in wartime is a crash landing, really, because it's an unprepared surface.
The gliders were to land on 2 jungle clearings 200 miles deep into enemy-held territory. And then the men would build 2 airstrips called Broadway and Piccadilly.
The next morning, they were on their way through the jungle to fight the Japanese.
While Wingate led his Chindits through the jungle, pilots O.B. Carter in Little Kitten and Walter Radovich in a B-25 bomber started prowling Burma. And 2 days after Broadway opened, they hit the jackpot at the enemy's jungle airbase in Schwebo. 60 Japanese aircraft were caught on the ground.
It was like shooting fish in a barrel. We cleaned up on that base.
We almost ran into each other. It was so exciting.
When we send our planes out on a mission, crew chiefs don't have anything to do. So we go to the radio shack and listen to the pilot-to-pilot conversations. And on this particular day at Schwebo, they were having a field day.
We were back on the second mission and did some more damage, and Cochrane wanted to send us out again after dark to try and finish up the job. We never found the target that night. But on the way back from that third mission, the whole country was covered with a smoke haze due to burning of crops. And we couldn't find our home base. And our ground crews, realizing that, took barrels of gasoline and lighted them on fire. We were able to get home that way. I'll never forget that mission.
It turns out that until we go to Afghanistan, that is the deepest penetration behind enemy lines that's ever been conducted.
Well, we've got a great country. It's one of the things I'm certain it's surely worth fighting for.
Our commander in the 1st Air Commando Group was named Phil Cochrane. I think he was a college roommate of the cartoonist Milton Caniff. Milton Caniff wrote the comic strip Terry and the Pirates, and someone in that group, and I'm not so sure about what it was, Cochrane himself, was feeding him all the information we were doing. Now, it was so unbelievable that he published it without any changes because nobody would believe it anyway. So we used to write home and tell our families, if you want to know what we're doing, read the funny paper. And then the next letter we'd say Terry and the Pirates, and that kind of got around the censors a little bit. But we were the first ones to do many, many things, and it read like a comic strip, what we did. 20 of them, I counted them. I guess it's sort of like buck fever. I rolled over and went right down through the middle of them and never fired a shot. Made a head-on pass to the whole formation. Now this time I was shooting, but I'm sure I didn't hit anybody. And they raised their noses and shot at me, so again I had a lot of speed. This time I got a little smarter and I crawled up to the right rear and picked out tail end Charlie and went in and shot him down. And then I dove away, and this time 2 of them followed me. But they didn't stay with me very long. And I kind of pulled up a little bit and counted them, and there was 18 left. The Japanese Zero is very, very maneuverable. And we were taught, actually it comes from General Chenault in the Flying Tiger philosophy, make one pass at the enemy, and if you miss, dive away from them and get out of Dodge and come back the next day when you have the advantage. As a young man, when you're 21 years old, you feel sort of invincible. I mean, you know that there's a lot of death and destruction, but you always think it's going to happen to the other guy. I think you can assume that almost all pilots, in a way, they're fighter pilots, have one goal in mind, that's to get into combat. That's where they want to be. And I was no exception. I wanted it, and I would do it over again in a minute.